Good afternoon, Vice Chair Wishart and members of the Appropriations Committee. I'm Senator Eliot Bostar, that's E-L-I-O-T-B-O-S-T-A-R. I represent Legislative District 29. I'm here to present LB464, a bill to allow movement of funds across approved line items or emerging needs within behavioral health region budgets. This bill does not allocate any additional funds and will have no fiscal impact. It simply creates legislative intent language to provide behavioral health regions the flexibility to make the best use of the funds already allocated within their budgets so that they may serve their clients, our constituents, to the greatest effect. Testifiers behind me will speak to the specific line items likely to be reinforced by reallocating funds, but the fundamental purpose of this legislation is to provide the agencies caring for our most vulnerable populations the ability to react to emerging needs within their own budgets and to adjust to the dynamic nature of the care that providers within their region deliver. Patricia Djurdjevic, the Administrator for Region 6 Behavioral Health Care, will offer the committee specific examples within her region and other situations statewide where this flexibility could have been useful in the last 2 years when Nebraska faced unprecedented flooding and a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. Service providers, represented by former Senator Annette Dubas, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations, will speak to the challenges they face and how this legislation would have improved their ability to deliver quality service. With that, thank you for your time today and thank you for your consideration. I would encourage you to support LB464 and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions from the committee? We're letting you off easy today.
I have a bill after this.
Will you be staying?
I will, yes.
Okay. Any additional proponents for LB 464?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Wishart and members of the Appropriation Committee. My name is Patty Djurdjevic, P-A-T-T-I-J-U-R-J-E-V-I-C-H. I'm the Administrator for Region 6 Behavioral Health Care, which is one of 6 regional behavioral health authorities in Nebraska. Take that off. That's helpful. I appear before you today on behalf of the Nebraska Association of Regional Administrators in support of LB 464. You'll find in your testimony that you have in front of you, there's a paragraph that provides some basic summary information about the behavioral health regions for your use if you might find that helpful. LB 464 provides intent language that the regional administrators encourage the committee to include as part of the current biennial budget under consideration and in future ones as well. The language contained in LB 464 will express the intent of the legislature that for appropriations to Agency 25, Department of Health and Human Services, Program 38, Behavioral Health Aid, designated funding as allocated to Program 38 for subsequent subawards to the regional behavioral health authorities would be utilized to provide activities in line with approved annual budget plans of the regions or activities identified through demonstrated need. Movement of funding would be allowed across approved line items or emerging needs to maximize actual activity of the regions and, when possible, implement new behavioral health services and supports. The last several years have been challenging for the behavioral health service delivery system. The 2019 floods, Gehring, Fort Laramie Canal collapse, and the pandemic created an unanticipated and unprecedented demand for services to meet the behavioral health and well-being needs of our residents. Regions have worked closely with service providers to shift dollars and make adjustments in order to meet the demand created by these traumatic events. Even with anticipated service trends, the budgeting process is not an exact science, and in some cases, historical utilization is not always the best predictor. This is why the ability to make budget adjustments and to maximize the dollars available to us is critical to service providers and persons needing access to services. To clarify, there is a process to shift funds in regional budgets, but it is concerning when there are pots of money that are unavailable because of legislative intent as defined by the department that restricts the use and access. We should seek to have few exceptions to accessing the dollars so that they are available to providers to serve people in need. Ultimately, without greater funding flexibility, we have a situation where behavioral health needs may not be addressed and unspent funding is left in budgets at year end and may be lost to our system. The regional administrators can follow up with detailed information about our experiences if that would be helpful to you. Please note that LB464 is not intended to change the roles and responsibilities of the department and regions as it relates to oversight of behavioral health funding. During the pandemic, we held weekly Zoom calls with the leadership of our providers through the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations. Executive Director DuBois will follow me in testimony and will speak to the importance of funding flexibility and responsiveness of the regional behavioral health system. We felt that direct communication with our providers was the most important thing we could do during the pandemic. We greatly appreciate the time you have committed to hear this important bill and urge that the provisions of this bill be included in the mainline budget. Thank you.
Does anybody in the committee have any questions? Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Thank you for being here today. I see in your testimony it says that last year the challenges of the Gearing-Fort Laramie Canal collapse. Can you tell me what behavioral health services were delivered because of that collapse?
It would be in response to any of the stressors on individuals in the behavioral health realm, whether it's mental health assistance, substance use assistance, that folks may have experienced as a result of the stress that was caused by that canal collapse.
Do you know if they delivered any services?
I would have to follow up with you on that from the region that represents that area. I'm sure they could identify that.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Funds that has funding available that you could use if needed or whatever, and that's what the request is here for. But what assurance do we have, I guess, at the end of the year or at the end of the budget cycle that using down some funds then won't require that part to be replaced?
Certainly, when we have availability of dollars, we have to identify whether it is something that needs to be sustained or whether it's a one-time kind of expenditure to support the system. So when we talk about potentially these dollars in our budget that we would like to have greater flexibility, these would be situations where it would have to be sustainable. So we would look specifically at what those needs are and be able to forecast then the availability, the continued availability of those dollars going forward to continue to support those things.
Thank you.
So who ultimately then would be, so my understanding is that we're divided into 6 regions. And each region, do you get funding based off of a certain kind of aid formula, funding formula?
There is an agreed upon formula. We work with the Division of Behavioral Health on that. It is based on the population in the region and the poverty rate within the population or within the region.
Okay. So what this bill is seeking to do is that, you distribute out those funds. Would this mean that certain regions, funds that would otherwise go to a different region would be going to help a specific region whose community has experienced, significant issues? Is that how it would work?
We probably haven't gotten to that level of conversation. It really has focused primarily on dollars that each region sees that they have within their budget that for the reason of legislative, what's identified as legislative intent, can only be spent a certain way. So if I could provide an example to you, the cost model funding that was appropriated to the Division of Behavioral Health and then came to the regions to increase reimbursement rates. So, and that was based on a prior year projection of how much would be needed within each region, within each service, how much would be needed to raise those reimbursement rates. What we found then is sometimes the utilization changes from one year to the next. And so the dollars in that cost model pot of money were used to raise those rates, and we expended it in those services. But if the utilization was down somewhat in those services, then that cost model sits separately in the budget, and up until this point has not been able to be used in any other fashion to either to invest in other services if necessary.
Okay, so as I'm understanding this, this is less about shifting dollars between different regions and more about flexibility within each region for further budgeting. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Additional proponents?
I wouldn't want to rely on my memory. Good afternoon, Senator Wishart and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Annette Dubas, ANNETTE-DUBAS, and I am the Executive Director for the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations, better known as NABHO. We are a statewide organization advocating for behavioral health providers, hospitals, regional behavioral health authorities, and consumers. NABHO would like to thank Senator Bostar for introducing LB464 that allows for that movement of funds across approved line items or emerging needs within each of the behavioral health regions' budgets to maximize those actual services being provided. When our behavioral health regional system was created, it was in large part to allow for the unique mental health needs of the area to be served, to transition people from regional centers to appropriate local community-based services. Our regions have an element of local control through the regional governing boards and a local funding match requirement. The Division of Behavioral Health assists the 6 regions to ensure that they can provide a balanced behavioral health system, which differs from Medicaid. Medicaid is more like an insurer. It's a payer, and that's how it operates, solely as a payer. Through their provider networks, the regions look to provide the right services at the right time with elements that include prevention and early intervention, treatment, and recovery. So it's more of a system approach. These regional services also include looking at the social determinants of health, such as housing and employment. And these services, again, are all funded through the Behavioral Health Services Fund Program 38. LB464 is intended to support the flexible nature of the regional system and its ability to meet local needs. At times, after the legislature has appropriated monies, there can be that breakdown in understanding of what the intent really is there for those monies that were appropriated. So I mean, I think we all know legislative intent, doesn't carry the power of law, so to speak, but it certainly gives the direction to the various agencies about what your intent was when those dollars were appropriated. So this language clearly states that it is the intent of the legislature to allow that movement of funding across approved line items or emerging needs to maximize actual activity in the behavioral health regions, and when possible, implement new behavioral health services. So I think what we're looking for is really to lay out clearly to the division that each of the regions have that flexibility to meet those unique and individual needs of the people within their regions. I mentioned the difference between the Division of Behavioral Health as a system versus Medicaid as a payer who has to operate under the rules and regulations of the federal government. Having Program 38 funding available to meet specific needs is critical For example, during COVID, day rehab providers who could not bill Medicaid for services if they couldn't meet a 3-hour minimum. And I mean, that was a hard and fast, no exceptions, no flexibility there. So if they weren't able to, through telehealth services, meet that 3-hour minimum of services, they couldn't bill Medicaid. But through the Division of Behavioral Health, there was the flexibility there. They could bill in smaller increments, make sure that those individuals were getting the services that they needed, and make sure that the providers were being reimbursed for those services. There's many other services like that the regions can provide and bill for that just don't fit into the Medicaid system. And again, regions are able to act quickly, and again, meeting those needs of the individuals. I know I heard an example years ago. A region was able to help a provider who had an emergency situation, and they were going to struggle to make payroll. And because of what they were able to do and manage those dollars within their regions, they were able to help that provider meet that need. And again, it's about keeping that system going and making sure that people don't fall through the cracks. So NABHO supports the region administrators and their requests that you include this language in your budget. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Senator Clements?
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Thank you for being here. It was already asked, but when I first read this, it looked like it was going to be money transferred between regions. And are you confirming it's not between regions, but just within a region of different services that region provides?
Correct. Keeping it within that specific regional system so those needs of that region can be met.
And you're talking about possible new types of services. Are there services that aren't available to offer now that they're wanting to do?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I know, again, especially during COVID, there's been some unique situations where individuals have needed, through telehealth or what have you. So I will certainly try to see if there are some specific services that, they would have liked to have done and maybe ran into some problems. But for the most part, I think, with what they were able to do, they tried hard to meet those needs.
And in our committee, I don't think we allocate the division of each region, the budget of each region. Right. We allocate a total dollar amount, but DHHS then does that individual allocation.
Right.
Right, that's probably why I was confused by that.
And I think, again, it goes back to that, what's that intent language? Why do you usually put intent language into your budget? Is to give that direction to the agencies. And so if you're trying to be clearer with what that intent is and giving those individual regions that additional flexibility that they may need to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the individuals, I think that's what they're looking for.
Thank you. That clarifies it well.
You bet.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Additional proponents? Seeing none, we will move to opponents. Seeing none, we will move to neutral. Hello again.
Hi. Busy day today. So good afternoon, Chairperson Wishart and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Sherry Dawson, SHERIDAWSON, and I serve as the Director of the Division of Behavioral Health in the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm here to testify in a neutral capacity to this bill. I want to make sure that the opportunity for us to continue to partner with the regions is very important. It's really important that we recognize local needs. It's not the same in the Panhandle as it is in Seward, Nebraska, as it is in other parts of the state. And so we do try and promote as much flexibility as we can. And in fact, we do work through the planning process and have allowed shifting of funds. So just for an example, this year, in fiscal year 21, we had 99 requests so far for shifting of funds, and 98 of those have been approved, totaling about $1.5 million. Additionally, I wanted to say that we recognize that, you know, the floods and the pandemic certainly have created challenges, and there has been additional federal funding to be able to help make sure those needs are met. We do have examples of when we have done budget adjustments to be able to put money out to the providers. At the end, as Senator Dubas was talking about, we are a capitated system, which means we get your appropriation and pretty much when it's done, it's done. But we have providers that continue to serve people that are eligible for our services. And so we call those overproduced units. And in fiscal year 20, we really scrubbed all the budgets, including those that are 038s or the divisions. And there was $3.3 million that was able to go out to the providers for those overproduced units. There's also a newer service that's coming up here in Region 5 and had $400,843 that was able to be utilized for startup for that particular service. I would say the pandemic has caused challenges. I talked a little this morning about the COVID gap funding. Year to date, that's about $3.7 million that has been available to the providers to sustain and make sure we have access to services. Based on projections right now, we're looking that they're in our 038 probably over $5 to $6 million in balance. I will say, just as a director, that I've since 2015, I've made a concerted effort to make sure that we're maximizing the dollars. When I started, there wasn't any exchange between regions. So if a region still had money on the table, they still had money on the table. And we worked real hard, and I think we worked together to identify those opportunities where if there was funding in 038 that we could move across other regions and have done so. Now the challenge is we have state funds, federal funds, which have strings, and then we have the county funds, as you know, Senator Erdman, that are utilized as match. And so there are certain services that are matched and others that are not. And so it's not just as simple as making the request. There are strings from a federal standpoint and the match standpoint that we need to continue to try and support. I would say, again, that overall, I think the regions do a fantastic job of really trying to meet the needs of the individuals. I think where we might differ is in that flexibility in the movement of funds. We can shift and have done so. In 2019, when we look at region contracts, the balance, and this is for a total of all of the regions, was $1.6 million, and in 2020 there was $3.8. So I would say there's flexibility to be able to do that, although there are some funds that have strings that we're not able to have them move. I would just finally close in the opportunity to continue to say that we make every effort to maximize all the dollars that we receive and make sure that those consumer needs are able to be met. I understand flexibility. Cost model came up this morning in appropriations, and we have held a hard line that those are for rates, and the opportunity for us to be able to fully fund or do continued cost model work needs to stay in that line. And so we do differ from the regional perspective on that. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Senator Bushrat. Thank you for coming. I'm not a real fan of neutral, you maybe know that, but, so I conclude from your comments that if we pass this, there are funds that will be restricted, they wouldn't be able to transfer anyway, is that correct?
Well, I think if it passes, how I would understand it is that there would be flexibility for the regions regardless of whether there were some of those strings, potentially.
So they could use federal funds, they could transfer those? You said there were strings attached to those in the county funds.
So on the federal funds from the block grant, we have to have a maintenance of effort. So one of the things that we always check is to make sure that that shift of funds isn't going to impact that maintenance of effort.
Okay, so did you also say or intend that you're now doing transfers? So would this bill be needed if you're already doing that?
Well, again, I think where we're coming from is that we do shifts, and I gave the example of this fiscal year. I think the cost model was cited as the example, and as I said, I will admit that the region, or excuse me, behavioral health has held the line that those are for cost model and rate related.
So in your opinion, is there advantage of doing this?
Senator, that's a really hard question to ask or to answer.
Is there
I know you don't like neutral.
Is there an advantage to doing this?
You know, here's the thing. Is there an opportunity for us to stop and look at our rules and how we're doing things? That's always an advantage, I think. Can we do something differently? I would say at this point from our position in the Division of Behavioral Health is that we're making some flexibility in doing those shifts. So you want me to go one way or the other there? I've worked with you before.
Your final answer is maybe. That's okay.
Any other questions? Senator Dorn.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wizard. Thank you for being here again. So currently, the way it's set right now, if they want to shift some money from, I call it one line in their budget to another line, they have to make the request to your department.
Yes.
How I guess, how long, or when they make the request, how long then before they get the okay, or what? Walk us through that a little bit.
Sure.
What all happens?
Sure. So there's a template or a form. So shifts are scheduled to be done on a quarterly basis, and then there's also an emergency provision. So again, if there is some emergency that comes up that was unanticipated, they can provide that issue and the reason and the data and where they're going to be moving money and look at utilization and all of those kinds of things. And that information comes to us when we make a decision.
How long does it normally take you to make a decision? If they make a request on a quarterly basis, are you looking at a couple of weeks, or what are you looking at?
I'd have to get back to you on exact amount of time. I will say that probably a couple of weeks. It may have been a little bit longer some time ago, but we're staffed up pretty well now. But I can get that question answered for you.
So you said you also approved, I think, 98 out of 99
for this fiscal year.
In this fiscal year.
Fiscal year 21.
Is that a normal amount? Normal percentage that I call it in past years, or I'm trying to understand why maybe you're the benefit of this bill and why it was brought, I guess.
Again, I think I'd have to get some specific, how many shifts were in fiscal year 20, Senator. I don't know that. But I do know, and we have had conversations, and it was cited today about use of that cost model for other funds. And I think our position would be that in the cases that we reviewed, there was other money that was available and could have been used.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I did want to clarify, just dovetailing off of what Senator Erdman said. So if we pass this bill, potentially then regions would have the ability to pull money from that cost model.
That would be my understanding.
Okay. And in terms of utilizing federal funds that have a maintenance of effort, they would be able to move forward on utilizing those?
That's my understanding of the intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Shane.
Mm-hmm.
Any other neutral? Seeing none, Senator Bostar? You are welcome to close.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wisher, members of the Appropriations Committee, and thank you for everyone who contributed to the discussion. So, this legislation simply creates legislative intent language which provides our behavioral health regions the flexibility to make the best use of the funds already allocated within their budgets so that they can better serve the residents of Nebraska. And for that reason, I would encourage you to support the legislation, and I'd be happy to answer any final questions you might have, or more likely try to find you the answers to the questions you might have.
Any other questions? I have one, Senator. There are a couple of items that Director Dawson listed, federal funds where there's maintenance of effort, where once you start spending those, you've got to continue at that level, or some of the rate appropriations that as a committee, we're working hard to get those rates up. Would you be amenable at all to discussions about whether there's a way to hold sort of sacred some funds within these regions while allowing for some other flexibility?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, certainly that, the intent here with the regions was to provide additional flexibility. I'm sure that we would all be welcome the opportunity to have discussions with the committee to ensure that we didn't create any undue burdens or hardships.
Thank you. Any last questions? Seeing none, that closes the hearing for LB464 and Senator Bostar. We are ready to open on LB465. Oh, excuse me. Brittany's beckoning to me. We do have letters for the record for LB464. We have the Nebraska Hospital Association and Blue Valley Behavioral Health. And that closes the hearing. And we will open on 465.
Thank you again, Vice Chair Wishart and members of the Appropriations Committee. I'm Senator Elliot Bostar, that's ELIOTBOSTAR, and I represent Legislative District 29. LB465 clarifies current statutory language by explicitly adding landlord risk mitigation payments as housing-related assistance to the list of authorized uses of the Behavioral Health Services Fund. Under LB465, a landlord risk mitigation payment could be provided to a landlord who leases or rents property to a very low-income adult receiving housing services from a behavioral health region. The payment may be used for excessive damage to the rental property, any lost rent, legal fees incurred by the landlord in excess of the security deposit, or any other expenses incurred by the landlord as a result of leasing or renting property to service recipients. Historically, landlord risk mitigation payments were utilized by individual behavioral health regions to assist in maintaining relationships with landlords who rent to service recipients. For many years, regional behavioral health authorities utilized these funds not only to assist with the permitted use under the statute, but also for landlord risk mitigation. In 2017, an audit indicated that landlord risk mitigation was not a permitted use and the practice was discontinued. Landlord risk mitigation is an important tool for the behavioral health regions. The rental and housing assistance programs administered by the behavioral health regions and enhanced by this legislation allow very low income service recipients to find and maintain adequate housing in Nebraska. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I would encourage you to support LB465, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Any questions? Senator Erdman?
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Bostar, so I read what the bill says here. The landlord risk mitigation payment means payment provided to the landlord who leases or rents property to a low-income adult with serious mental illness. And it goes on to say excessive damage, it'll pay for that, plus lawyer fees if it exceeds the damage deposit. Who will make the decision what the damages are? Say I'm the landlord, I have a tenant in there, I think the damages are $3,000. How do I prove that? What's the mitigation process? Who decides that 3,000 is the right number? Have to go to court and do that?
Yeah, Senator, I think that's a great question. And considering that this practice was being utilized for years, there is an administrator of a health region behind me that I think can talk about how this used to work and probably what the intent would be going forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator. Will you remain for closing?
I will. Yes, ma'am.
Moving on to proponents.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Wishart, members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is CJ Johnson. I am the Regional Administrator for Region 5 Systems, which is the regional behavioral health authority for 16 counties in southeast Nebraska. I am here to provide testimony in support of LB465 on behalf of the Nebraska Association of Regional Administrators who represent all 6 regional behavioral health authorities in the state of Nebraska. A component of the Behavioral Health Reform Act passed in 2004 was the utilization of a portion of the state stamp tax to develop a rental assistance program for individuals with serious and persistent mental illness, or SPMI. The primary outcome of the program is to support individuals towards permanent housing, such as Section 8 housing vouchers under federal funding or self-sufficiency. The program utilizes a supported housing model that links individuals receiving rental assistance to behavioral health services that support their recovery. Region 5 Systems has seen up to a 76% success rate during the years this funding has been in place. It is important to note that stable housing has a significant impact on an individual's long-term recovery in addressing the impact of mental health on daily living. An aspect of the rental assistance program up until 2017 was the ability to utilize a part of the funding for mitigating landlord liability. In 2017, it was determined that language in state statute did not support the usage of the funding for mitigating landlord liability. Many times, individuals living with an SPMI have not only had a history of, quote, poor rental experiences, unquote, they may experience acute episodes of mental health crisis or compromised coping, which results in excessive damage to the rental properties that they are occupying. To maintain positive landlord relationships and maintain the availability of rental properties for promoting stable housing for individuals with SPMI, it is important to ensure some level of assurance that excessive damages are covered through supportive housing programs. As already stated, this practice is not new to the current statewide rental assistance program and is practiced throughout the United States, including many HUD or Department of Housing and Urban Development programs. I will provide the committee with multiple links of programs across the USA that provide landlord mitigation funding after today's hearing. It should be noted that the Division of Behavioral Health publicly identifies the ongoing success of this statewide program administered by the regional behavioral health authorities. In summary, LB465 does not require additional funding, rather a request to reinstate the former practice of mitigating landlord liability in the statewide rental assistance program. The language proposed in LB465 would amend Nebraska Revised Statute 71-812, which creates and defines the scope of the Behavioral Health Services Fund and allow the former practice of landlord risk mitigation payments into what is included in housing-related assistance. To support LB 465 would enhance an already successful support service promoting the long-term recovery of individuals with a serious and persistent mental illness. The Nebraska Association of Regional Administrators appreciate your consideration in this matter and ask that LB465 be moved forward to ensure the ongoing success of the statewide rental program. Thank you for your time, and I'll gladly answer any questions now.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Clifton?
Thank you, Senator Wisher. Thanks for coming today. So I get what you're trying to do here, and I understand the value of what you're trying to do, having owned property in the past. How prevalent is it that that this occurs? I mean, is it a pretty regular basis that you have a problem, or?
It's not a regular problem in the sense that not every individual that goes in our rental assistance program leaves excessive damage. But a lot of times, you know, you may have somebody, you know, just because of coping issues, maybe they come back to their apartment and, you know, they forgot their key. And so for them, you know, they may not have access to other people to support them or other things, so they might break through a window to get in there or break their door, you know, as an example. You may have somebody who has a mental health acute crisis, and because of that, may paint stuff on their walls because they think that's going to protect them, or, you know, different issues like that. So there's numerous things that can happen, and it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen, you know, if a landlord says, you know, this was with this program we were working with, we're just not going to work with that program anymore, then you start losing units. And when you start losing units, you start losing the ability to provide vouchers to individuals. So it's just an aspect of the program to say, we want to work with you. We understand there are occasions when this happens, and so we want to maintain good landlord relationships for that program.
And so when this was utilized in the past, I think you said 2017?
Yes.
They did away with it, or it wasn't?
I'm sorry?
In 2017, it wasn't deemed appropriate, or we weren't allowed to spend the money that way? Is that what the case was?
Well, when the program first started in 2005, it came out of behavioral health reform from 2004. And so stamp tax was set aside specifically to provide the voucher program or the rental assistance program. Of course, as that was developing, we discovered different things. For example, we provide vouchers. We found out that there are individuals that if we do a one-time payment, like for their electricity or maybe just their down deposit moving into a place, then we can help them get into that stable housing. So we created the ability to do one-time kind of funding. Then we also started finding out landlords were hesitant to work with individuals who maybe had that past experience of bad rentership or whatever. So we created the ability, you know, as part of that work, said, okay, let's create a process so that when we do have to support a landlord on some excessive damages, how do we pay that? So that evolved from 2005. We continued to do that up till 2017. There was a state audit with the Division of Behavioral Health, and it was just simply deemed that the language in 2004 and the statute that followed didn't support using the funds for that landlord mitigation costs.
So that in essence explains why there's no increase. All you're just saying is clarifying language and the intent.
Right, just taking the same dollars we get and just carving out a small section of that, if you will, to be able to make those payments when they happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Senator Dorn?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wishart, and thank you, CJ, for being here. And he did just probably answered one of my questions, because I wondered how often you had landlords that wouldn't rent because of maybe not knowing the risk of renting to someone with some behavioral health, and maybe not, like I'll call it, having to withstand the cost of damages or stuff like that.
Well, we go out and are constantly recruiting landlords, and yes, some of them say, I don't want to be a part of this program, I don't want to participate. But the other side of it is we do have individual landlords that we've fostered pretty good relationships with, but then maybe something happens and we try and negotiate with them. You know, not to use any names, but just this last summer, due to an incident that happened in a unit where some water also flowed into some other units and everything. You know, we tried to negotiate some of that, but the landlord just said, you know, I'm done. And this was somebody that provided us a number of units for the program, or at least worked with us on a number. So it's that risk that we're trying to mitigate. And again, this is common practice across the United States in any kind of rental assistance program such as this. It's very common practice.
And there's no new cost of funding. It's basically using the funds that are there. How will that affect the ability maybe that will now not allow several entities or several people that want to qualify under this program not to be funded to have rent assistance?
Well, you know, there's kind of the chicken or the egg discussion there, because one of them is, you know, if you carve out some money, are you going to have to deny people some vouchers? Okay. The other side of that argument, which we're seeing, is that if we can't provide this landlord mitigation and we lose landlords to work with, we don't have units to put people in, and so that's going to build our wait list, and it probably, to me, would have even more impact. You know, we can always, you know, move some funding around, but if we start losing landlords and units, then we don't have those. And I do know in other parts of Nebraska that has always kind of been a challenge anyway, is that availability of units availability. So
thank you.
Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. So it says in the fiscal note you're going to use money from the Behavioral Health Service Cash Fund. How much money's in that cash fund, do you know?
Well, the stamp tax, and that it's from the stamp tax directly that comes from, and I'm not going to be able to give you the exact figure, but I think statewide currently that's right around $2 million. I can get you the exact amount.
When you say stamp tax, what do you mean by that?
So, and I'll explain it the best I can.
Okay.
So when new homes are built, there's what's called a stamp tax, and that stamp tax goes to NYFA to promote affordable housing in the state. So in 2004, there was a recognition that individuals who may have a serious persistent mental illness needs affordable housing, but they also need supportive case management along with them. So the purpose of, so they said, okay, we already have a chunk of money that goes to NYFA to do affordable housing. What if we carved out a portion of that, shot it out to the regions and let them start this rental assistance program, where the rental assistance program said one of two things. One is we will provide vouchers to individuals who have a serious and persistent mental illness to help get them to stable housing, and at the same time we'll also require that they are involved in some kind of behavioral health program to help support them during that effort. Okay. So we're not asking for additional funds. It's already that money that's been allocated for years through that process.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for being here. Additional proponents? We do have submitted written testimony in support from Maggie Peavy on behalf of Centerpoint. Anybody in opposition? Okay, seeing none. Anyone in neutral? Okay, seeing none. Senator Bostar, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wishart and members of the Appropriations Committee. Landlord risk mitigation payments are an important tool for the behavioral health regions to maintain relationships with private sector partners in order to continue serving the most valuable populations of our state. And with that, I would just encourage you to consider passage of this bill or adoption of it. And I'm happy to answer any final questions.
Any final questions? I have one. So the language that you have in this bill, does this address the issues that the auditor found when it ended up discontinuing the program in 2017.
It is my understanding that, yes, this language would allow the behavioral health regions to continue the practice that they were previously engaged in of providing these risk mitigation payments to landlords.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We also have one letter of support from Jack Irons, and that closes our hearing on LB465.